Welcome back to our continuing study through the Old Testament book of Habakkuk. If you've missed previous episodes in this series, go back and watch those first. This is a sequential study, these go in order. This may be the first time you're seeing a Disciple Dojo video. If that's the case, we're glad you're here, but watch the other videos in this series first. And as always, if you appreciate this type of long-form, in-depth biblical teaching, we would love for you, if you haven't done so already, to subscribe to the channel. That helps us to continue to make more of it. All right, let's jump right back into Habakkuk chapter 2. So in the last episode, we saw Habakkuk is getting ready to see how God's going to rebuke him. He has talked back to God, and he knows it, and he realizes that he's in a precarious position, but he knows that he has to be honest and he has to bear his soul to the Lord. And so, like a good watchman, he's standing on the wall watching. But in this case, he's watching to see what the Lord is going to speak against him and how he'll respond when he's rebuked. But Yahweh answered me and said, write a vision and make it clear upon the tablets. Now, we're going to come right back to that in just a second, but right up front, it's important to know this section that we're about to look at, chapter 2, verses 2 through 5, we're actually going to try to look at 2 through 6. They are riddled with translation and textual difficulties. This is some of the hardest poetry in all of the Bible, as we've said in previous episodes, and nowhere is that more apparent than in this passage. And what makes it worse is that this is the most famous passage in Habakkuk, so famous that it's quoted 3 times in the New Testament. So Turner, in his commentary, says the grammar, syntax, and literary development of Habakkuk 2 through 5 are full of difficulties, ambiguities, and a high percentage of text-critical problems. Habakkuk 2:4 clearly contrasts 2 figures, and we'll see that in a minute, but the verse is a text-critical nightmare. So let's look at what he's talking about. Verse 2, and he answered me, the Lord, and he said, that's clear, Kathov chazon, write a vision, uva'er al haluchoth, and make it clear upon the tablets. And here's where it starts to get tricky. The Hebrew text says, Lama'an yarutz korea bo, so that, or in order that, he will run, or he may run, korea bo, the one calling out on it, or the one calling upon it. Korea bo could mean to call, or it can mean to call out something, which is, we would say, to read out loud. And so the Septuagint picks up on that nuance, but it says, hopos dioche, so that he might pursue ha-anagenos kon alta, the one reading them, or so that the reader might pursue them. So there's always some divergence here, that second part. So God is telling Habakkuk, write a vision, like he's going to show him a vision, write it clear upon tablets. And there's 2 ways you can take this. So clear that someone running can read it, like someone running by could read it. In other words, put it on a big billboard type tablet setting, like a monument, a stele, or write it so clearly on tablets, like handheld tablets, that the one running, we would say the courier, the one taking the message, can call it out, can read it as he's running through, as he's going by. Now, Maxwell Booth suggests that this is not the first one, that writing it on a big display tablet, but rather it's talking about handheld tablets, and it's speaking about a specific way that things were written down in the ancient Israelite context. She says, the more probable candidate for Habakkuk 2 was a wooden tablet coated with wax. Several of these tablets would be hinged together to form diptychs or polyptychs, a practice well attested in 8th century BC Assyria and northern Syria, so right before the time of Habakkuk. Because wax was easy to write on and allowed corrections, scribes used these tablets to write a first draft from dictation and could then copy the text carefully onto a sheet or a roll of papyrus or leather. A passage in Isaiah with parallels to Habakkuk reflects this 2-step process. So in Isaiah 38, God says, go now, write it on a tablet in their presence, and inscribe it on a scroll. There's a little typo there. Let me fix that. It will be for the future, forever and ever. But some have said, no, it's talking about like what the ancient kings would do when they had something that they wanted to tell people. They would write down on these big tablets or these big monuments, they would inscribe it somewhere very clearly, very legibly, so that anyone could read it, whether they were running by, passing through, just looking up at a glance. So there's some debate about what Habakkuk is being told to do. But overall, even despite the translation question, do you take the Septuagint or the Hebrew text? It's still clear God's telling him to write a vision and make it clear on tablets. But then verse 3, the difficulties continue. Ki od chazon la moed, for yet a vision for an appointed time. So this vision is for yet an appointed time. It's something for the future. V'yapeach lakates, and it will testify, it will breathe. This is the word used to like talk about giving testimony in court, to an end. Velo yukazev, and not it will lie. So it will testify, it will speak to, it will give testimony to an end, lakates. Now that can be the end of time or an end, a purpose, a particular end within history, and it will not lie. So it's a trustworthy vision for sometime in the future. Im yithmama, if it is slow, yithmama is like to kind of hobble about or just if it's slow. Hakelo, wait for it. Ki bo yabo, for coming it will come, or we would say for it will surely come. Lo ya'acher, it will not remain behind. Some translations say it will not tarry or it will not linger or something like that. But I think remain behind makes more sense, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But the Septuagint does not say it. The Septuagint says, if it's slow, wait for him, for he will surely come. He will not stay behind. So the Hebrew text seems to be saying the vision is what Habakkuk needs to wait, even if it seems to tarry, even if it seems to linger, wait, because it's going to come. Whereas the Septuagint reads more of he. It's unnamed, and of course, some took this as messianic. Others took it as no, it's talking about God. God is going to come on the day of the Lord. And then the next line continues to be different between the Hebrew and the Greek. The Hebrew says, Hine upala, behold and upala it's a hapex legomenon. This is the only time this word appears used this way. So some says it has to do with a verb that means to be swollen or to be puffed up, inflated. And others say no, it has to do with a word that means like a mound, like a little, so swollen in the sense like a little mound of dirt or a mound of something, or possibly calloused, like a callus on your skin or on a plant or something. So behold the swollen or the calloused one, lo yashara nafsho bo, not it is upright, his life in him, or his soul in him. Nephesh is the word for life or soul. Some say his craving. But the Greek of this same section of verse 4 says, ean hupasteletai, if he may draw back, or if he may shrink back. So that's how they're taking hine upla. Uk eftoke e psuke mu in auto. Not is pleased my soul, or my soul is not pleased in him or by him. And then the next part of the verse, the Hebrew, v'tzadik ba'emunatho yichyeh. But the righteous, or a righteous one, in his faithfulness, he will live. And the Septuagint says, but the righteous, ek pisteos mu, from my faithfulness will live. So you basically have two somewhat different ways of reading this passage. When this is the most famous passage in Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 4, the righteous will live by faith is how it's quoted in the New Testament. It's quoted 3 times, twice by Paul and once in Hebrews. But the Septuagint version is what's quoted in the New Testament. And so that's what makes a lot of people say the Septuagint version is the original correct reading, and the Masoretic is a later corruption. Some would even say a changing of the passage. But it seems if the Masoretes were going to change a messianic passage, this one just doesn't seem like a candidate that you would go around and change. So I'm not convinced that the Hebrew text represents a changed version. I think if Possible that there was some kind of corruption or misreading or mistranslation, maybe. But regardless, you have two different meanings to this verse. So I'll read them both. For those of you that don't know Hebrew or Greek and you're kind of like, okay, wait, what exactly is going on? The Hebrew Bible text of Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 through 4 says, "But Yahweh answered me and said, write a vision and make it clear upon the tablets, so that the one calling upon it can run, because it's a vision for a yet appointed time and testifies to an end and doesn't lie. If it's slow, wait for it will surely come. It will not stay behind. Behold the swollen, his soul is not upright in him, but the righteous by his faithfulness will live." The Greek version, the Septuagint, the one that's quoted by the New Testament authors, says, "And the Lord answered me and said, write a vision and clearly on a tablet, so that the one reading might run after them, because it's yet a vision for an appointed time, and he will appear at an end and not in vain. If he's late, wait for him, because the one coming will be there. He will not tarry. If he draws back, my soul is not pleased by him, but the righteous one by my faith will live." So we're going to look at the Hebrew text, and I think the Hebrew text makes sense on its own. I think the Septuagint isn't saying something tremendously different, but it does maybe have a different emphasis than the Hebrew text. But I don't think they're completely contradictory readings. I think they can come from the same idea. Regardless, first thing he says, why did I say, if it's slow, wait for it will surely come, it will not stay behind? This is where I'm going to, in a rare instance, and I don't do this a lot, but I'm going to break with English translations on this. And I'll tell you why. And then you can decide. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's not like the people that translate the Bible are dummies, or it's not like I'm more expert in Hebrew text than any of them. This is where I land right now. I could very well be wrong, but most translations say the last part of the verse, if it tarries, wait for it will surely come and not delay. NIV, though it linger, wait for it will certainly come and will not delay. King James, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. So King James shows something of the contradiction in this verse. Though it tarry, wait for it will not tarry. Well, which is it? JPS, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not delay. Tanakh, even if it tarries, wait for it still, for it will surely come without delay. Revised Standard, if it seems slow, wait for it will surely come, it will not delay. New Revised, if it seems to tarry, wait for it will surely come, it will not delay. New American Standard, though it delays, wait for it will certainly come, it will not delay long. Holman Christian and Christian Standard, though it delays, wait for it, since it will certainly come and not be late. So here's why this verb, lo ya'acher, I mean, sometimes it means delay, but it can also mean to remain. Like, for instance, Genesis 32:5, Jacob tells his servant to say to Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have dwelled as an alien with Laban, and I have remained there until now. Not I have delayed there, but I have stayed there until now. Now, I'm not saying that it can't or doesn't usually mean delay or to mean to tarry or linger or something like that, and that's how it's translated in other passages. But sometimes it means to stay back, because literally achar means to be behind. So is it to be behind temporarily or to stay behind? So, it can have the sense of to linger. In the PL, it means to detain, to keep someone back or hold something back, to delay, to hesitate. So I don't think in English it makes good sense to translate this as it will not delay. No, I think yacher in this case means it will not stay back. It will not remain behind. It is coming. That's what he says. It is surely coming. You wouldn't tell someone to wait for something if it wasn't going to delay. God is telling Habakkuk it's going to delay. It's not going to be immediate. Wait for it, but it is coming. So this is why, again, I don't often disagree with the majority of English translations on something, but in this case, I do. Now, I could be wrong. I admit that openly, and if a Hebrew grammarian wants to step in and tell me why ya'acher in this case should not be translated as it will not stay behind, it will not remain, it is coming, then I would gladly hear that argument. But everything I've seen and read and looked at in this passage, this is where I stand. I can do no other. And this is a challenge for Habakkuk. It's a challenge in every age because we don't want to wait for something. Habakkuk, I'm sure, didn't want to wait for something far off in the future because he was crying out about violence and evil surrounding him now, at the moment. And we mentioned this in the last episode. Myrto Theochloris has a great observation. This is a tendency that everyone faces when God tells us that something is coming, but we are to wait. She says, we look to political parties to right the injustices we observe in our countries, and we readily alienate ourselves from those whose political convictions differ from ours. A political leader, of course, is a temporary solution, like the Chaldeans being raised up as the hand of punishment against the corrupt Israelites. Something more drastic, more radical, and more final is needed, a state of justice that cannot be overturned. Many Christians today are weary of waiting and are turning back to worldly messiahs. We must heed Habakkuk's vision again. If it's slow, wait for it. It is surely coming. It won't stay behind. God's not going to do nothing indefinitely. So within the structure of this section, this book, Turner says verses 2 and 3 introduce a vision. Verses 4 and 5, which we're about to look at, contrast different responses to the vision. Even so, none of it is a direct answer to any of Habakkuk's questions and complaints. Like, Habakkuk has asked very specific questions and raised very specific complaints, and God just says, write a vision and make it clear and wait for it. And then he gives them this vision that's going to be throughout the rest of the book. This indirectness is part of the theological point of the entire book, similar to Job. Like Job, Habakkuk wants answers, and he wants them now. And like Job, God's going to show Habakkuk something, and it's going to be awe-inspiring, and it's going to reorient Habakkuk's entire way of looking at the world. But it's not a direct answer in the way that we would expect as modern readers. And that is part of the theological message, the point of the whole book. So Turner says, one day a vision revealed will be a vision fulfilled. A divine promise will give way to divine presence. And that's what both Job and Habakkuk get a glimpse of in their own time. And that's what God's people ever since have waited to get the fullness of on the day of the Lord. So this section, after telling Habakkuk to wait, God seems to change the subject. Verse 4, behold, the swollen or the calloused, some people say the one whose ego is inflated or something like that, his soul is not upright in him, but the righteous by his faithfulness will live. Or the Septuagint, which is quoted by the author of Hebrews, if he draws back, my soul is not pleased by him, but the righteous one by my faith will live. So regardless of how you translate the first part of verse 4, it's contrasting a way not to be either puffed up and not having an upright soul, or drawing back and God's soul not being pleased with that drawing back. But the second line, they both seem to agree. The righteous by faithfulness, by his faithfulness will live. Or the Septuagint, the righteous by my faith will live. And Paul would pick up on this passage and he would quote it in Romans, talking about how God justified, in both Romans and Galatians, how God justified Abraham by faith. It wasn't by works that Abraham was justified, but by faith. And so he would quote this passage, the righteous by faith will live. And it makes sense in context. Turner says, Abraham himself is the paradigm of trusting in a God who makes outlandish promises, many of which would not be fulfilled for a very long time. Through you, all nations of the earth will be blessed. I will give to you this land. I'll give you an offspring. Your descendants will be more than the stars in the sky. I mean, these are just wildly outlandish seeming claims that God makes to Abraham. But in Genesis 15, Abraham believed God, put his faith in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So it makes perfect sense that Paul would note that Abraham was a paradigm of what Habakkuk is talking about here. He says the true seed of Abraham, and referencing what Jesus said in John 8 or what Paul says in Romans 9, understand the value of waiting on the Lord in the face of counter evidence. We continue to be called to prove our spiritual ancestry by doing the works that Abraham did. And there's another typo. This is what Jesus said in John 8. If Abraham was your father, you would do what Abraham did. Namely, living by faith and faithfulness in light of God's self-revelation. So you can see Romans 4:3, Galatians 3:6, James 2:23. The righteous live by faithfulness. And that's the point of this section of Habakkuk. He's saying, listen, the people who aren't upright, they're the swollen. And I think the word swollen makes the most sense of upala. Their soul is not upright. And God is going to talk more about what the swollen look like. In this next section, in verses 5 and 6, he's going to start to unpack it, and then the woes are going to come for the rest of the chapter. And we're going to get a clear picture of what God thinks about the ones whose soul are not upright within them. But he's also planting the seed in Habakkuk that the righteous in faith or faithfulness or trustworthiness. That's how this word emunah, faithfulness, trustworthiness, his trustworthiness. Now there's a question, is it God's trustworthiness or is it the trustworthiness of the righteous? Well, the Septuagint really makes that clear by translating it ek pisteos mu, by my righteousness will live. And so I think the Hebrew is talking about the his in it is the Lord's righteousness. But either way, it could also be talking about his faithfulness, meaning the righteous being faithful to the covenant God who was faithful to him in the first place. You know, grace is reciprocated. God gives grace, and then the faithful are those who reciprocate, who respond by living according to that grace in faithfulness. The whole works-faith dichotomy, that's not a very prevalent idea. I don't even think it exists at all in the Hebrew Bible. That's a much later, like 16th century debate. In the biblical mind, it's the same. It's two sides of the same coin, faith and faithfulness. It's a life characterized by emunah, trustworthiness, steadfastness. And so whether it's talking about, like the Septuagint is putting the trust in God who's coming, wait for him, he will surely come. So God, or possibly God's Messiah, is going to come and make things right. Or whether the Hebrew text, he's talking about the vision, wait for it, it will surely come, it will not remain behind. Turner argues for a both and approach. He says the Septuagint reading in big picture coheres with that of the Hebrew text. Rather than forcing the grammar, though, it's best to see a conflation or blurring between Yahweh, the vision, and its fulfillment. The use of vision in verse 3, therefore, points to a real vision, but it is also a circumlocution for Yahweh who will fulfill his promises contained in the vision. In short, the vision will come, 2:3b, because Yahweh himself comes, chapter 3, verse 3. And this revealing what God's telling Habakkuk is this is going to have a sorting aspect. It's going to sort people into two categories. And it's not going to be national categories, you know, evil Babylonians and righteous Judahites. No, it's going to go deeper than that. Right says it this way, there are those who are puffed up and proud, whose whole inner person, their soul, is not right at all. There are also those who are in a right relationship with God because they are living in faith and faithfulness. God will immediately go on to expand on the first category of people in a scorching condemnation of Babylon, which is what we're going to see in the next session in verses 5 through 19. And in chapter 3, Habakkuk will help us understand what it means and costs to be among the second category. In other words, we're going to see in chapter 3 what it means to be among those who live by faithfulness. Right continues, for Habakkuk, steeped in the stories and scriptures and songs of Israel, the righteous are those who have put their faith in the promises of Yahweh God, who remember with thankfulness his redeeming acts in their history, especially the Exodus, who have committed themselves to worship Yahweh alone, and who are striving to walk in his ways by covenantal love and obedience, who know that this is the way to remain within the sphere of God's blessing. It's also the way of life itself, even through death, if it comes to that. And the righteous are people who will go on living in faith and obedience, even in the midst of anxiety, need, opposition, and suffering, waiting in hope for God's promised future. That's what it means that, but the righteous in his faithfulness he will live. F.F. Bruce, New Testament scholar, writing on Habakkuk there's a 3-volume set edited by Thomas McMiskey on the Minor Prophets. F.F. Bruce says, there are those whose heart is not right in relation to God. Instead of trusting in him, they hold aloof in a spirit of self-sufficiency, trusting in themselves. Their souls are inflated. They lack either substance or stability, and a pinprick will make them collapse. The Septuagint is applied in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 38 and 39 to those who give up their patience and faith because the promise is so long in being fulfilled and so incur eternal ruin. So the author of Hebrews looks back at this verse and particularly how the Septuagint translates it, and then uses it as encouragement or as warning to Christians who are being tempted to turn away. to not live by faith, but to turn back. And that's the phrase that the author of Hebrews picks up on and is applying. His mind goes to Habakkuk 2 in the Septuagint and says, God's not pleased with those who turn back. The righteous will live by faithfulness, not by shrinking back. So let us not be those who shrink back and are destroyed. And he goes on to exhort. So that's how the verse is used in Hebrews. On the other hand, the righteous person will maintain life because of faithfulness to God, an attitude that includes both personal loyalty and that trust in his word that waits patiently until it is time for him to act. The phrase, spirit is not right in them, is generic, applying to all, whether Israelite or non-Israelite, who reckon without God. So too the righteous is generic. No one person in particular is referred to, but those who, like Habakkuk, trust in God are included. The righteous lives by God's own standard of righteousness. The forensic aspect of the term is not prominent here. And what F.F. Bruce means by this is the later reading, like people are familiar with the righteous will live by faith, primarily from its use in the New Testament, usually not as familiar with it in its original context in Habakkuk. And so they read into it later debates, later questions about what is faith? The righteous will live by faith. Oh, it's faith, as in sola fide, faith alone, not works. So it's only about belief. It's not about anything we do to earn salvation. And then the whole Reformation thought gets kind of lumped into Habakkuk, and the idea of, this is forensic faith. This is God declaring someone righteous with no regard for their actions or their obedience or anything, but just solely by faith they are being made right, and that's what it means. And whole sermons get preached about what this verse means that don't ever really deal with the text of Habakkuk, but rather with how Paul quotes Habakkuk. And so F.F. Bruce is saying in Habakkuk, that's not the point. The point is in faithfulness, the righteous will live. And Turner agrees. Turner says, emunah has many nuanced connotations, but faith is not one of them. The ultimate living of the righteous depends on the vision's trustworthiness and God's reliability. Like, it's not about the faith of the righteousness, like the righteous have to have enough faith. Emunah never has that sense. Rather, it's about faithfulness. So faith is like an object of something we believe. Faithfulness is the trustworthiness of what it is we're putting our faith in. And that's what's prioritized in Habakkuk. So the words fidelity or allegiance for emunah capture best this relational focus. Does that mean that you earn your salvation by being faithful, by your fidelity? That's how you get saved? No, and Turner says that as well. Fidelity to Yahweh doesn't make one righteous, but it does mark the righteous. I love this line. Obedience is the natural overflow of fundamental trust and commitment. That's why both Paul and James could use Abraham as an example of someone who has faith, and that faith is verified, not created, but verified by his works. So there's no conflict between Paul and James when it comes to the role of faith in the life of the believer, as many people who only have a cursory familiarity with those passages often suggest. Faithfulness doesn't make one right. It is the evidence that one has been made right. So if there is no faithfulness, then there's a legitimate reason to question if one has been made right at all. Maxwell Booth says, but as his world disintegrated around him, the prophet would have to exercise faith as he waited for the vision to come to pass. Over the course of the book, the prophet moved from a simplistic faith to a mature faith, forged by the experience of God's presence in the midst of troubles. Habakkuk's profound expression of faith in the closing verses of the book, which we'll see, demonstrates faith and faithfulness are as closely intertwined in the Old Testament as in the New Testament. Faith and faithfulness, in fact, are two sides of the same coin. They are inseparable, but the imprint struck first is faith. Faith comes first, but faith results in faithfulness. If there is no faithfulness, there is no faith. And now Habakkuk's going to begin to contrast. So he'll get back to the righteous will live by his faithfulness, but now he's going to get back to that, the calloused or the swollen one. His soul is not upright within him. And that's where we'll close this section out in verses 5 and 6. Verse 5 says, Va'af ki hayayin. And indeed, af ki is sort of a compound expression, and indeed, hayayin, literally the wine, boged gever yachir, betrays a man strong or a strong man. Velo yinve. And he does not settle or find pasture, like settle down. Now, there is a variant reading. I think it's in Pesher Habakkuk or one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It doesn't say, for indeed the wine, this word here, hayayin, it actually says hon. And hon is the word for wealth. So some Hebrew versions say, indeed, wealth betrays the strong man or an arrogant warrior. You could translate strong man, Geber, Yahir, strong or arrogant, and Geber is man, but it also has a connotation a lot of times of warrior or mighty man. Now, most translations keep the Masoretic text of wine, but not all of them. Lexham English translates how much less the defiant, the arrogant, treacherous man. The JPS, or the NJPS rather, says how much less then shall the defiant go unpunished, the treacherous, arrogant man. The New Revised Standard, moreover, wealth is treacherous, the arrogant do not endure. And then Eugene Peterson in the Message says, note well, money deceives. The arrogant rich don't last. So there are some English translations that prefer wealth as the original reading, hon, rather than hayayin. But most have wine. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest. King James, yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man. The old JPS, yea, moreover, wine is a treacherous dealer. The haughty man abideth not. ESV, moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. NASB, furthermore, wine betrays an arrogant man. So ESV reads it as wine is kind of the personification of an arrogant man. New American, wine betrays an arrogant man. And then Holman Christian and CSB, moreover, wine betrays, semicolon, an arrogant man is never at rest. Now, my personal opinion, again, I think both work. I think wine, and I've put wine in quotes here because I think wine is being used metaphorically. I think this is poetry, and the wine is, the meaning of it is the thing that intoxicates the arrogant warrior who does not settle. And what is the thing that intoxicates him? His wealth, his conquering, his might. So I think that both of these senses are there, but they're both communicated in the word hayayin, in the wine. Because look at the rest of the description. Indeed, the wine betrays an arrogant warrior, so he does not settle, because he opens wide as Sheol his gullet. And it's literally nafsho, his throat. This is the word. It can also mean soul or his life, but you don't talk about he opening your life or opening your soul. You do talk about opening your literal throat to eat, to consume, to drink, to eat. And that's why I think in this case, nafsho is literal. It means his throat. And gullet captures the sense of this just decadence and ravenous gluttony. Like gullet is just I think it's a good English word for what's going on here, because he opens wide as Sheol his gullet. Like the grave is always open wide. It can never get enough. The poetic image of the grave in the Hebrew prophets and in the wisdom literature is it is never satisfied. The grave will always swallow more victims. And that's the image that's being used here poetically to describe the arrogant warrior and the wine that he keeps chugging down his throat, because he opens wide as Sheol his gullet, and he, like death, is also never satiated or satisfied. He's never full, just like death. So he collects to himself all the nations, and he gathers to himself all the peoples. This is what Babylon and all empires do. And this is what now God is showing Habakkuk as part of the vision, what he thinks about such things. And so verse 6 is a transition. It goes on into the next section, which are the 5 woes. It says, will not these, all of them, and who are these? These are the peoples, the nations that he's gathered. Will not these, all of them, over him a proverb raise? And a taunt of riddles about him. So now it's going to go into a poetic section of these 5 satirical riddle, and don't think riddle like we think in a modern sense, but riddle is like a cryptic saying, a taunt, a satire, a parable. The Septuagint actually uses parabole. You could say all of these, in other words, all of the victims of this ravenous, never satisfied mighty warrior, which in context is referring primarily to Babylon, but God's going to show it's referring not just to Babylon, but also to some who are in Israel. The mighty are going to have a taunt, a proverb, a saying, a belittling saying, raised over them. And then that's where the next part begins. And so Maxwell Booth has a good observation. She says, the warning of Habakkuk 2:5a also foreshadowed the end of the Babylonian Empire in 539 BC. Daniel 5 describes how a drunken Belshazzar sought to entertain 1,000 of his noblemen at a great feast. Under the influence of wine, the ruler sent for silver and gold goblets from the temple in Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar had seized as trophies of his conquest. While the wine flowed freely to and from the sacred vessels, suddenly a disembodied hand appeared, frightening the arrogant ruler and etching his fate upon the wall. And the formerly awe-inspiring kingdom of Babylonia was divided between the Medes and the Persians. That very night, it happened. You can read about this in Daniel 5. That's why I think wine is probably the original reading. I agree with Maxwell Booth on this. And so remarking on this section before going into the rest of chapter 2, which is going to be the taunts themselves, the 5 woes, but wrapping up this section about God giving Habakkuk a vision and telling him to write it down and make it clear and wait for it, even if it seems to delay, even if it does delay, it's not going to remain back. It's going to come. And when it does, it's going to reveal the righteous and the unrighteous in how they respond to this vision. So Maxwell Booth says the first panel of the literary triptych, and she thinks the book of Habakkuk is like a literary triptych. There are 3 parts to it. The first part of the literary triptych ends with the final image of a violent man bloated with greed, seated at a bountiful table of food and drink, ravenously reaching to devour everything in sight. When the wicked seek to satisfy insatiable appetites with tasteless substitutes, they themselves become fodder for an equally insatiable Sheol. Each generation needs to hear that their cravings point to a deeper hunger and thirst that nothing can fill but the gospel of the one who is himself both living water and bread of life. And it's not just going to be about Babylon, it's going to be about everyone. Turner says, though Babylon is the historical figure behind the wicked character in verses 4a and 5, the nation becomes symbolic of God's enemies in general. Likewise, the righteous of 4b does not reduce to a particular nation or subset of a nation. The remnant theology that can separate Israel into 2 internal groups based on fidelity to Yahweh can also redefine what it means to be the people of God in such a way that true Israel includes the faithful righteous, whether ethnic Jew or not. And Paul make this point very clear in Romans chapter 2 and then in chapter 9. Not all Israel is Israel, and those calling on the name of the Lord are the ones who are saved. So that faithfulness is what determines covenant membership, not ethnicity or bloodline or parentage or national identity. Not in Habakkuk's day, not in Paul's day, not today. So as we wrap up this episode, this study, here are your discussion questions, those of you that are doing this as a small group study. In what ways do you see people being calloused or puffed up, upala, in today's world? In what ways are you tempted to be? And number 2, how does Habakkuk's description of the righteous one or the righteous, hasadik, affect your understanding of righteousness? Stay tuned for more. We're going to continue in Habakkuk chapter 2. We're going to get into the 5 woes next. If you appreciate this type of long-form teaching, we've already said, the best way to show it is by subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Another way that is incredibly helpful, this is the most tangible way that you can help continue this teaching ministry, is by becoming a monthly dojo donor. We don't have Patreon memberships. We don't have YouTube memberships or tiered access to different content. We don't do any of that. All our videos, our teaching videos, we take out the mid-roll ads. So if you're seeing ads during a teaching video, like before and at the end, there may be a skippable ads, but in the middle, if you're seeing that, that's not what we've done on our end. That's YouTube doing what YouTube's going to do because this is their platform. But we've turned off all the mid-roll ads in all of our teaching videos so that they can be used in a small group setting and not be interrupted by ads. And we lose a decent bit of money by doing that. We just ask that the Lord makes that up by providing people who see and appreciate this ministry and want to support it. And if that's you, we would love for you at the link below right here on the screen to consider becoming a monthly dojo donor. Any dollar amount, I don't see who gives what. That's handled by our finance director and our board. If you do become a dojo donor, I would love to send you, just as a little thank you, one of the patches that we have, the iron-on patches. We have them in a light, whoops, upside down. We have them in light color, like the one I have on my hat right now. We also have them in dark color. These are just a quick, simple thank you to those of you who support this ministry in a very tangible way by being monthly donors. So if that's you, shoot me a message through our website's contact page and just say, I'm a monthly dojo donor. I'd love to get a patch. Tell me if you want a dark one or a light one. Give me your address. I'll put it in the mail to you. We won't use your address for anything. It's just so we can send you this as a thank you. It's nothing big. It's nothing huge. There's nothing magical about it. It's not a special prayer patch that I've prayed over. And then when you get it, you're going to receive your blessing if you plant your seed of faith into this ministry. Can I get an amen? No, none of that. None of that. That's all foolishness. It's just a token of thanks for those of you who literally keep these lights on and keep this whole thing going. So that'll do for now. Stay tuned for more in our study through the often overlooked, misunderstood, or neglected book of Habakkuk. And in the meantime, as always, keep training.